Friday evening, last night, if you've been here for all the other evenings, or first night if it's this. This is the first talk you can do, and I've got the question, why did Jesus give us the Bible? And the first thing I want to say is that it seems to me that we all, each one of us, whatever age we are, wherever we've come from, we all build our lives on the words of other people. It starts from a young age. You receive some instruction from a parent that maybe say, don't go out of the don't go out of the park, don't go out of the playground. And you listen to that and you start building your life, and it starts laying a foundation for how you're going to live, how you're going to operate. My mum used to say to me, if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But the problem is I grew up with 3 sisters, so I had to observe silence from the age of 11 to 16. And we all have different kinds of advice, haven't we, that we receive. My math teacher, Mr. Blessed, said, you're going to get as much out as you put in. Well, I tried to inject a lot of fun into his maths class, but he wasn't that keen for me to get fun out of it. Oh, I'm sure all of us will have heard some form of this. Treat others how you want to be treated. How you want others to treat you. Some form of that, some adult will have said it to us, and we take it as a foundation, a building block for life. My mum this is a real favourite of my mum's. If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? And I say, well, Mum, clearly no, I wouldn't, because it's very dangerous. But they weren't jumping off cliffs, they were just drinking Mad Dog 2020 in the park. So I thought that would be all right. And then, of course, you get the sagely advice and wisdom of dads. Son, never eat yellow snow. Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Dad. Okay, it's probably good advice, that, isn't it? But it'll stand me in good stead for the rest of my life. Now, it's an undeniable reality that we've all been influenced by the words of other people, and we build our lives on the words of people. They set a foundation for us. Words are powerful. Words are effective. Words can build up. Words can tear down. Words can start wars. They can also bring about peace. Words can produce courage. They can produce laughter. They can produce tears. They can produce happiness. They can produce hope. Words are powerful, and they do things for us. And Jesus understands that. He understands the power and purpose of words, and particularly the power and purpose of his words, the words that he speaks. So I want to share with you some teaching that Jesus gave when he was on earth. It's from a part of the Bible called Luke that tells the story of Jesus' life. You've got some sheets of paper on the tables, so you can look at it if you like and follow along as I read it. And here's how Jesus begins. He says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say?" Let me just pause there. So Jesus is basically saying, look, why do you give me this title, Lord, if you're not going to relate to me as your Lord? Okay, this is the issue that he's addressing. What do my words actually mean to you if you call me Lord? And then he continues, he says this, "As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." So put simply, Jesus says, look, the reason I'm giving you the Bible, the reason I've given you my words, because the Bible, and that's just the words of Jesus. And he says, the reason I've given you that is so that you can have a life that lasts, a life that stands, a life that endures and keeps going. And he says, but to get that, to understand that, you need to see the differences between these two builders in this story that I'm telling you. But before we look at the differences, let me just point out some of the things that these two builders had in common, some of the similarities. The first one, I wonder if you've noticed, is they both got the same plan. They both have the same dream. Both of them say, let's build a house. Now, the house is just symbolic for people who want a secure, safe future. They want a life that flourishes. It happens only when you leave your parents' home and you find it by your own home and you feel like you've arrived, you've made it, you're stable in life because you have your own home. And so it's symbolic building a house for wanting a secure, stable life. Now, if you think about it, very few people, if any, decide to purposefully make a mess of their life, do they? People don't wake up one morning, get a pencil, sit down and say, okay, let me plan how I can make a car crash of my life this year. Or they don't, most people don't sit daydreaming, don't they? And in their daydreams, it's like, oh yeah, I'm daydreaming about shipwrecking my future. People don't do that, do they? When you plan and when you have daydreams, it's about a secure future, a stable future, a flourishing life. That's what we all desire. And the thing that these guys had in common is that's what they both desired. They wanted to build a house and have a secure future. So that's the first thing in common. And the second thing is that they both had Jesus' words. They both had God's advice on life, God's truth. It wasn't that one builder has really good blueprints and the other one's got crummy blueprints. Like one of the builders says, oh, I'm going to go to the Guild of City Builders and get my plans from there. And the other one's just tapping away and says, well, I'm going to cowboybuilders.com and I'll get my plans from there. No, Jesus is really clear. He says in the story that both of these builders heard my words. It said of both the builders, both builders have the same instructor and the same instructions. They hear Jesus' words, God's advice on life, God's truth. They know how to build the flourishing, stable, secure life. So what do they have in common? They both have the same plans and the same dreams, secure life, a flourishing life. They both have access to God's truth, God's instructions, so that they can build that stable and flourishing life. Here's the third thing that they had in common, similarity. They both experienced the same storm. Now, it wasn't that one experienced a really strong storm and the other a mild storm. Like, one house experienced a furious storm while the other was a storm in a teacup. No, we're to imagine that both these houses are in the same neighborhood and they're both experiencing the same storm. Maybe that they were built side by side. Now, the storms of life come to each one of us. None of us can escape them. Storms of life come in different shapes, different sizes at different times. But the question that Jesus is raising as he taught the people in his day and now as it comes to us is the foundation on which you've built your life, is it stable enough in order to weather those storms? Just think of some storms when the boss is overbearing at work, maybe. Does it make work overwhelming? Or have you got a solid foundation? Or let's say you've got children and suddenly in their teenage years they're just becoming so unruly that it makes life unbearable. Have you laid a solid foundation that will help you to weather that storm? Or what about when there's too much month at the end of the money? Have you laid a good foundation that will enable you to weather that storm? Or what about when the stress is so great that you just think you're going to break? Have you laid a solid foundation that will enable you to weather that storm? This is what Jesus is asking people. What are you building upon? And is it a stable and secure foundation that can weather the storms? You see, storms will come. They come to all of us. But the question is whether our life, our relationships, our families, our identities, our status, whatever it is, whether they can actually weather the storms that will come our way. Now, this is really important because often when in life, when something's happened and we feel like we're crumbling, immediately want to say the issue is some external factor. An overbearing boss, an unruly child, financial constraints. It's the external factor out there, the storm, that is causing me to crumble. And Jesus says, no, 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 no. It's not the storm. That's not the real issue. The real issue is the foundation. Because it doesn't matter what the storm is like. If the foundation is solid and secure, the house will remain standing. You see, I know of many people, in fact, a number of them have shared their stories during this week, at the afternoon or in the evening. Some who've endured and experienced terrible storms in their life, but they're still standing strong, they're still stable, they're still secure because they built on a solid foundation. So the real issue that's revealed by Jesus in this teaching comes in the differences between these two builders. And one of the major differences is the foundation on which they built. That's the crux, really, of what Jesus is saying. One man built his house on rock, the other built his house on the ground. Now, you don't have to be an expert builder to know that building a house and building a structure on the ground, on sand, instead of on rock, is not a smart thing to do. Like when I was younger, my village used to take trips to the seaside, to Scarborough, Bridlington. Most of the village used to go. And I remember me and my friends spending ages building this huge sandcastle. All of us were working on it. It was so impressive. And then, of course, a couple of hours before it was time to leave, the tide comes in, and what happens? The tide just washes away the sandcastle. And I remember us being really disappointed and upset, and my dad just saying, "What did you expect? How long did you think it was going to last?" Of course, it's a straightforward question. How long do you think it's going to last if you build on sand? Not very long at all. So the question is, we do that at the seaside because it's a bit of fun and we know that it's temporary. But what entices us to build our life on the sand of what we might call the world's advice, the world's wisdom, that is outside of what the Bible teaches? What entices us to do that, to build on such flimsy foundations that are so easily washed away? Well, I guess there's a number of things, but here's some that are obvious from the if you build on sand or rock. Digging a foundation on rock is hard work. So I was in the building trade for 4 years, and when we got to the stage where we got more work coming in, we used to pay people to come in. And do you know what we paid them to do? The foundations, because it's the hardest part. And then we'd lay the bricks and do the roof because that's reasonably enjoyable. But you get some others in to start laying the foundation. It's hard work building a foundation. Where building upon ground and sand without digging down to the rock is a piece of cake. The cost involved in laying foundation is huge. If you ever have a quote for building work and you talk about the foundation, you'll see that so much of the cost is tied to the foundations. But of course, there's hardly any cost involved if you just want to throw it onto the ground. And the time that is put in to digging foundations and going down deep is huge. But if you're not going to do that, of course, you save yourself plenty of time. So the hard work, the big cost, the long time, that's why people favor building their life on sand or on ground rather than the solid rock. And building your life on the world's advice, or what we might call the world's wisdom, that is teaching and things outside of God's truth in the Bible, outside Jesus' words, well, that may be easy and not demand too much of you, but it's an unstable foundation. But building a life on the rock of Jesus' words is hard work, costly, takes time, but as we'll see, it's worth it. But it's no surprise to me, and it was no surprise to Jesus, that his words would often be neglected, ridiculed, mocked, and not given any attention because he knows that they place a demand on people that other words and other wisdom doesn't. But no matter how hard and costly it's worth it. Jesus gave us the Bible, his word, so that we could live a flourishing life, a good life, a life that lasts. So here's the final contrast between these two builders. It's the biggest contrast, and this is where Jesus really drives the point home. It says, the house of Mr. Sandman collapsed. Symbolically, that's Jesus saying, look, his life came to a disastrous end. But the house of Mr. Rock Man, it stood secure, unshakable in the storm. So Jesus is inviting us to ask the question of ourselves, what foundation are we building our lives upon? You see, building a life on the wisdom of the world, the advice out there outside of the Bible, isn't going to lay a foundation that will be secure and stand in the storms of life or in the storm at the end of life that we heard about yesterday. Rob was talking about that final judgment. But building a life on the wisdom of Jesus as revealed in his word, the Bible, is a secure and strong and stable foundation that will enable you to stand fast in the storms of life, and most importantly, to be secure in the final storm at the end of all life. You see, Jesus gave us the Bible, he gave us his word to prepare us for that final storm, to prepare us for the final judgment, to prepare us for the world to come, the new world that he will create. Now, I found in my life, personally, that the strongest motivation to put that hard work in, to soak up the cost, to put in the time to not only hearing, but practicing Jesus' teaching, comes from this fact that I don't want my life to come crashing down around my ears when the storms come. And I certainly don't want my life to come crashing down around my ears when the final storm comes of God's judgment. You see, how often do you think to yourself, if I'd just been willing to put in that bit more effort, that would have gone a lot better? I've had it a few times, never when we were doing any work for people in the building trade, but when I was doing work for myself, you just cut a few corners, you don't get the right stuff, you don't give the time that's needed. But then all of a sudden that nice wooden gazebo that you put in your garden that you hope was going to be there for decades to come, and in the first storm it's in the front garden rather than the back garden. And you think, if I just put in a bit more effort. Or how many times have you been called and you just thought, if I just spend a little bit more. I had that experience recently. We were trying to fill up a big pool for our baptisms a couple of weeks back. And I went on and I had to find an adapter to go onto a certain tap in a school and onto a hose pipe. And I saw one, you could get one for £4. I thought, that'll be rubbish. And then there's one for like £10, and then there's one for £20. I thought, the £10 will definitely, what's the difference between a little bit of rubber and plastic between 10 and 20? And then as I was there making my own devices with rubber gloves and string to try and get this thing to hold on, I wish I'd invested in the £20 one. Sometimes you're left thinking, I wish I'd have given it more time. I wish I spent that little bit more money. And when we come to thinking about Jesus' words, the Bible that he's given to us, we often have different perspectives on it. And I want to finish with one final story that hopefully will just help you to chew over this whole idea of the perspective that you have on Jesus' words, the Bible. Let's imagine Ed, okay? Let's imagine Ed as a child. We can probably, he's a bit of a child. Let's imagine Ed when he was a younger child, okay? So, and imagine he's 7 years old, he's going to the park with his parents. Okay, I know Ed really well, so I can do an excellent impression of him as a younger child. So he goes in, and his parents take him in, and there's a fence all around the park. Let's say it's Beresford Park, with a gate and a little latch at the top that he can't reach to keep him in. And Ed sees it, and he goes, I hate this park. I don't like it. I can't go and wander off into the woods. I can't go around the pond and see the swans and throw stones at them, which is probably what Ed did as a young lad. And he's complaining about it. Oh, it's so restrictive. Anyway, his parents usher him into the park. They've not hit him yet. They should have. Things would have gone much better if they had. But they can't, so they usher him into the park. And then he sees a sign that says, no dogs allowed. He says, oh, why aren't dogs allowed in the park? That's so unfair. Oh, you know, you're crushing my fun. I like dogs. It would be great to run around with them and roll in the dirt with them. So he's just complaining about that. And his parents push him further along and says, come on, let's just get on the climbing frame, probably hoping that he'll sort of get lost there or something. But they get him in, and then he goes to the climbing frame, and it's got all, you know, that embarrassment part. It's got that wood chipping and the little bits of plastic and what have you. And it's going in his train, and he's, oh, I can't believe this. This is so irritating. This stuff's going in my trainers. So the fence is restrictive. The signs are killing off his fun. The wood chipping is irritating. But what's his parents' perspective on it all? His parents think, well, I'm so glad this fence is here because the guy's such a numpty. He'll be in that pond within like half an hour if he was let out of this park. Well, I'm glad this sign's here that dogs are not allowed in, because what if there was somebody who had a dog that was vicious? Or what if it just one of those irresponsible people who let the dogs mess and don't pick it up, and he ends up getting bacteria in his eyes and going blind? That's just what we think about in our house all the time when we take the children out. And then they say, well, it's all right to climb up that big climbing frame, because if he falls, he's going to get he'll get a softer landing now, but he would have got a softer landing back then because of all this wood chipping. You see, his perspective as a child is, oh, this is restrictive, this fence. This is crushing my fun, this sign. Oh, this bark is irritating. This wood chipping. But his parents are thinking, wow, this fence creates a safe environment for him to live in. This sign is guarding him against danger. This wood chipping is protecting him so that he can enjoy being in here. And is it possible, I'll just ask you, is it possible that God, who created everything and created each one of us, is it possible that if he gives some instruction to you, maybe it's to create an environment in which you can flourish, in which you can be protected, in which your life can be happy? Jesus says, look, the reason I've given you the Bible, my words, is so that you can be safe, so that you can be secure, so that you can flourish. And he says, not only in the storms of life that try to knock us here and now, but yesterday we heard that there's a storm coming at the end of all things that is going to wipe everyone and everything away. And at that point, there'll only be one group of people who will stand against that storm. And it is those who've trusted in Jesus and his words, which is what I would encourage each one of you to do. So thank you very much for listening to my stories. It's lovely to have an audience that I can tell my stories from the past about. And I hand back now to Liam. Cheers.